We've reviewed plenty of awesome gangster flicks on this channel over the years, but Little Caesar is one of the missing pieces of that bullet-ridden puzzle. Edward G. Robinson became a star after this, and Chief Wiggum would never be the same. But the movie is 93 years old. It could be Clint Eastwood's little brother. Yep, Clint is even older than this movie is. I think Gene Hackman is too. And anything or anyone that old couldn't have used the internet or probably even had an inkling to put outstanding gourmet coffee into their mug. So Rico was out of luck way back then, but you don't have to be. That's because you can order the freshest, fairly traded, premium Arabica beans in Canada by checking out the website for Sparkplug Coffee. They offer a wide variety of blends and roasts, including a rotation of seasonal blends, and you can get decaf or half-calf if that's the kind of calf you dig. The beans are distributed from here in Toronto to people in the US and, of course, Canada within a week of ordering. Hey, check this out. If you're a Canadian, like I am, you'll get free shipping. And if you sign up for a membership in Sparkplug's Autopilot Coffee Club, then you'll get perks and you'll get deals that non-members won't. Members even save money on every order, and they can customize to get shipments when it suits them. So if you have to pause or even cancel, go ahead. There isn't some irritating cancellation fee or any of that rigmarole, and all that helpful customization should tell you plainly that this is not a Coffee of the Month Club. So use that thing we call the internet to go to sparkplug.coffee/HYES. Using our HYES discount code will save you 20% off your next order. HYES. That's sparkplug.coffee and then slash it up with an HYES. Then you'll keep a few shekels in your billfold. All right, I'm eager to tell you all about the exploits of one Rico Bandello, so let's hit that theme music. And action. Have you ever seen Little Caesar? Hey everyone, and welcome to the 588th audio experience here on the Classic Movies podcast channel we call Have You Ever Seen? Every Monday you'll find a spoiler-filled episode dedicated to a film from long ago, every other Friday too, which means we average about 6 episodes a month, sometimes more. So much classic movies content. I'm the guy who loves to do impressions, but especially impressions of Edward G. Robinson, Ryan Ellis. My wife Bev isn't here again this week because she's still recovering from her heel surgery. We got way ahead back in March and April so that she wouldn't have to miss too many weeks, but we're not at the point of her returning just yet. I'm recording this in mid-April though, so we're about a month ahead. But I'm assuming this will be one of the last Mondays where I'll do a solo show. Let's hope she's back to normal by late May. When I review movies on my own, I take a stroll through the plot in sequential order, often taking little asides to ask reasonably good questions, only reasonably good, not actually good, or to make fun of something in the plot. Tomfoolery, I like it. But apart from it being a snazzy crime picture from the 30s, what makes this film worthy of me devoting all this time to post a podcast about it? Well, let's find out. Piccolo Cesare, as it was known in Italy, Piccolo Cesare, was released 93 years ago by Warner Brothers in January 1931. The flick made Edward G. Robinson a movie star, and people turned out in pretty good numbers to watch him do his violent Chicago mobster thing. In fact, Mervyn LeRoy's film reportedly broke box office records at a theater in New York during its opening weekend. The critics on Rotten Tomatoes love them some Little Caesar. Their percentage is 92, while the audiences are at a solid 75%, but the 25 Rotten Tomatoes critics, only 25, they average out at 7.4 out of 10. But you know what? As good as those numbers are, they're not even close to the best reviews for an Ed Robinson flick. He has 5 movies on there with 100% positive reviews, and 3 more with 97%. This extravaganza joined the National Film Registry in the year 2000. Apocalypse Now, Dracula, Goodfellas, Network, and Shaft were also inducted that year. We've covered all 5 of those. Oh, another inductee in 2000 was, get this, that Let's All Go to the Lobby, Let's All Go to the Lobby, Get Ourselves a Treat. I think that's the last part of it. That video they used to play before a movie started is in the National Film Registry, a commercial. So yeah, the registry is preserving a commercial, and if there are other examples of them doing that, I'm not aware of it. I know the music video for Thriller is in there as well, but that's a little different. That is a 10 or 12 minute thing, not a 30-second to 1 minute commercial. Little Caesar was nominated for 1 Oscar, although it didn't win it. That was for Best Writing Adaptation. Francis Edward Farrago and Robert N. Lee were up for that. Robert N., middle initial, Lee. The Best Picture winner, Cimarron, took that one home. And believe it or not, I'm walking on air. Cimarron is going to come up again later. Yes, I actually have a bit more to say about a movie that most people probably have never heard of, Best Picture winner or not. But here's the main reason I decided to review this film. That's because I'm an AFI guy, and the American Film Institute just adores it. They've got it 73rd on the top 100 quotes with that infamous line, "Mother of mercy, is this the end of Rico?" Spoiler alert, spoiler alert, spoiler alert. It is. The AFI also voted Rico as the 38th greatest bad guy in movie history on the top 100 heroes and villains list, and the film was 9th in the gangster category of the top 100 genres. It didn't make the cut for the top 100 thrills or the 1998 or 2007 lists of greatest American films of all time, but it was a nominee for those three lists. Getting back to the Gangster's top 10 on the genres list, it's interesting, and I guess fitting, that this, The Public Enemy, and the original Scarface all made the cut. You would have to know going in that Godfather and Godfather 2 and Goodfellas would make the cut, and they all did, but the AFI voters were smart enough to remember these old black and white films too. Little Caesar, Public Enemy, and Scarface were considered the forerunners of gangster films. As for where they all ranked, The Public Enemy was 8th, Scarface was 6th, Brian De Palma's Scarface was 10th, White Heat with Cagney was 4th, Pulp Fiction was 7th, The Godfather, Goodfellas, and Godfather 2 were 1, 2, and 3. I did that out of order, didn't I? It's a good list, and maybe even a great list, and it's one of the best ones the AFI ever did. And after today, we will have covered 9 of the 10. Only De Palma's Scarface remains unreviewed. Okay, now that we know this movie has been feted with a slew of honors and accolades over these past 93 years, what's what with the plot? Let's find out. As always with these old movies, we get opening credits with a music score accompaniment, only this isn't a big band type thing. This is more foreboding, which it should be. This movie is serious stuff. Gangster things go on, people die. Before we do get to any on-screen action, though, we get a Bible quote from the book of Matthew, which is, "For all they that take the sword shall perish with the sword." That's how they phrase it. Usually you think of that quote as more like, "For those who live by the sword shall die by the sword," something like that, right? See, even the Bible told you to cut it out, you mobster goons. Oh, and I should note that the IMDb trivia section claims that's from the book of Mark, but I double-checked on YouTube, and it is the book of Matthew that this movie quotes. Whichever book this is actually from in the Bible, they say Matthew. And we start out with the story proper with a killing at a filling station. Right away in this movie, shots are fired and presumably somebody breathed for the last time. Since gangster pictures were new to people in 1931, this must have been pretty jarring. We don't see bullets enter bodies, mind you, because we never did, even in the pre-code era. But still, seconds in and somebody's dead. It was by the two guys we meet in the very next scene in a greasy spoon. Here's Edward G. Robinson as Caesar and Rico Bandello. He isn't the big-time mob boss he'll become, of course, but he says he could be just as deadly as any of them. He's enjoying a meal with his buddy Joe. Douglas Fairbanks Jr. plays Joe, a man who wants to be a dancer. And Rico is not on board with that. He thinks dancing and women are a waste of time. I believe he lives up to those words throughout this movie, too. I don't think he ever dances, and he certainly doesn't seem to give a poop about the dames. The dames. But in any case, the little guy in this twosome is the one in charge, and he's taking his chum east to find their fortune in the world of tough guys. Incidentally, the legal term Rico, R-I-C-O, apparently came from this character. I actually wondered that while I was watching the movie, which I've seen many times, of course, but I was wondering this time. Then I looked up the trivia afterwards, and there's an entry about exactly that. RICO in the legal world stands for the Racketeer Influence and Corrupt Organizations Act, which was created to fight mobsters. And even if that piece of trivia I read is wrong, it's fascinating to think that a crime movie made in the early 30s could maybe even possibly have influenced a real-life government thing. And they say it did. Stanley Fields plays Sam Vittori, the Chicago boss who tells Rico that he's hired, but he doesn't want a bunch of half-cocked shooting going on, 'cause he's in charge. Well, you are for now, Sammykins, and it's Sam who names Rico Little Caesar. Even though movies lie about actors' heights all the time, just ask Tom Cruise. Well, don't ask him, he'll probably deny it, even if you're standing right beside him. Robinson was really short, and so was Jimmy Cagney. Eddie was only about 5'4", which means even I have about 3 inches on him. Cagney was only 5'5", and Bogart was just a little bit taller than that. Yet they all played iconic gangsters so convincingly that audiences didn't get hung up on their physical smallness. While Rico meets a bunch of gangsters who work for Sam, Joe lives up to his "I like the ladies" thing and does indeed make nice with a woman named Olga, played by Glenda Farrell. I don't know how long they've known each other, but they seem to be really, really in love. Well, until she feels the gun he has in his holster while they're kissing, and she doesn't like it. She pleads with him to give up the bad guy life. We keep on meeting dangerous and important men like Arnie Lorch and Pete Montana. Maurice Black and Ralph Ince play them. Ince, I-N-C-E. Rico has come along with Sam to a meeting with all these guys, and the underling doesn't like to be told what to do, although he does listen when Sam tells him to wait out in the hall. He just leaves very reluctantly. The cops are breathing down these gangsters' necks, so Pete suggests they all take it easy with the crime doings for a while. The doings shouldn't be a transpirin'. The trigger-happy Rico especially needs to ease up. Pete even gets in the little maniac's face when he's leaving, then so does Lorch. It's a nice touch that Rico at this point in the movie calls them Mr. Montana and Mr. Lorch. A hostile takeover is imminent, though, because surly Rico is flatly told no about pulling a job he wants to pull. Sam gives the orders, "You get me?" And our man Bandello leaves the room without saying anything, but he's seething. Part of the problem is that the other underlings are ripping on Joe, calling him yellow and saying that he's not one of the boys. Rico didn't want to believe that, but then he has no choice but to agree when he comes across Joe in the hall, who wants out of the life so he can dance the earth. What you mean, walk the earth? Joe has a gig on New Year's Eve at good old Club Palermo, but Rico insists that he work with them on a job that night, which is going to be to rob Club Palermo. Is Rico just trying to keep his friend from being whacked for disobeying what the boss wants? Or is he actually angry that Joe would rather do non-criminal things now? Because Joey Jojo must know that you can't just quit the mob and be a civilian. So go along to get along, or they might off you. No more dancing if no more breathing. Or it could just be that the mob boss in waiting, known as Little Caesar, is trying to boss his old friend around because he wants to, and will soon have the power to do exactly that. This movie was made and released not too long before the production code came into effect, which is very clear in this scene set on that fateful New Year's Eve. Olga's gussing up for her and Joe's big performance, or what she thinks will be their performance. When Glenda Farrell turns in her chair to talk to Fairbanks, though, you can clearly see her nipples through her dress. The right one might as well not be covered up by the dress material at all. Do you hear me complaining? But boobs aside, Rico and his buddies come into Joe's Club Palermo with guns blazing. It's not Joe's place, but he's there with her. And Caesar even shoots the crime commissioner, McClure, during the holdup, which Joe sees happen. Rico didn't wear a mask or anything either. Anybody could have identified him, especially his best friend, who was staring right at him. Landers Stevens, by the way, plays McClure's death in that irritating constipation style that old-timey actors often did, although at least when he fell to the ground, that seemed convincing. Rico tells Sam the job went great, but the boss is steaming when he finds out the head of the crime commission was the one who was gunned down. What a fine pickle we're in, you and that rod of yours. Is that a double entendre, Sammykins? Well, probably not, because Rico isn't the kind of guy who ever seems interested in using that other rod of his. Detectives show up that night to ask about an abandoned car that was involved in the heist. Sam claims to know nothing about it, and the coppers have no evidence, so they're about to vamoose. But not before the lead cop, Sergeant Flaherty, pulls a Columbo and says, "Oh yeah, McClure died tonight." The threat underneath that piece of information is very much implied. He's onto them, but he has no proof these are the guys who pulled the robbery. The fuzz leave and Rico comes out from his hiding spot. The little one is through taking orders from the man who likes to play solitaire, which Sam was doing when this scene started, just like he was when Rico first met him. "That's it, Sam, you're through." Rico doesn't grease his now former boss right here, right now. Right here, right now. But he pretty much tells them all that he's the man now, and his gun will speak its piece if any of them push back, or squeal, especially if they squeal. So the hostile takeover is complete, although it wasn't that hostile. Sam just let it happen. Sam had said earlier that Tony Passa was a great getaway man, but he's the one who left the car behind and scurried home. His mother reminisces with him about the old days, not noticing that Antonio is distraught and sweating. William Collier Jr. has quite a bit of heart in these few scenes as Tony, but then they shoot him in the heart while he's trying to go see his priest. Was he going to confess his sins? Probably. He dies right there on the church steps. It's reminiscent of how one of the mobsters gets bumped off in that consolidation of power scene at the end of The Godfather. I don't think it's a church in that movie, but it's on some stairs. So maybe Coppola was homaging this film. At a big dinner, the boys give Rico a pocket watch because he's a great guy. And the banquet sure is swell. I love when they say that in the old days. Things are swell. During his speech, Rico says he hears the booze is delicious, but he doesn't drink it. Not getting loaded on his own supply. Pretty smart. Business is going well because Rico looks snazzy in his three-piece suit and his flashy pinky ring, which he noticed one of the other gangsters looked like earlier. Maybe Lorch, Montana, one of those guys. Sam might just be putting on about how much fun he's having, but he does seem better off now as an underling. Rico's right. He had gone soft. Sly Sarge Flaherty shows up at the banquet and sneers his way through a brief combo with the new boss. He pulls another Columbo and does a "one more thing," again implying nothing but an "I'm on to you" threat, even though he still has no proof. This dude likes to just go visit gangsters and tell them, "Man, I wish I could arrest you, but I can't, so there!" Before the banquet scene wraps, one of the mob guys points out that Joe hasn't been around much lately, and he isn't at the dinner right now. "Joe, you are asking to get knocked off." Although Joe proves to have some value to them after all when he overhears Lorch talking to an associate that he's going to take Rico out. Joseph tries to let his old friend know that there's a hit out on him, but no one knows where the new boss is gone, so they can tell him about it. Ricky Reek is out buying papers, so he can have copies of the picture that was taken of all of them at the banquet. He's walking down the street all on his own with a bunch of papers, but somehow Lorch's machine gunners managed to barely graze him with some shots. There isn't even any blood on his left arm, even though he was shot there. They did smash the window of a store Rico was walking past at least, and that window certainly deserved it. So Rico takes a bunch of his best guys to go have some words with Arnie Lorch. As Rico says, "You hired these mugs and they missed, so you're through." At least he gives Arnie the chance to leave town, rather than be shot dead on the spot. For a man who is well known to be a killer, Rico doesn't shoot as many of his rivals as you might think. Sam is still alive. Lorch doesn't take a gun to the guts right here either. But Little Caesar is taking over, one way or another. The society papers even announced that Lorch and a few of his guys are leaving the north side for a long vacation. It's always handy for the world to know when a gangster plans to get out of town for some R&R. He certainly deserves it. Rico puts on a tux and goes to see the very rich, very fancy big boy, the ultimate boss in all of Chi-Town. And because this is the real top man, even Rico is deferential during the meeting. Sidney Blackmer, the guy who went on to be Roman Castevet in Rosemary's Baby 37 years later, plays Big Boy, incidentally. He tells Rico that Pete Montana is through, and it's Bandello who's going to be put in charge of the entire north side. A promotion, huh? He certainly deserves it. Now that he's got all this power, Rico calls Joe in for a meeting. The little guy misses his chum, and he wants him to help him out now that there's so much territory to rule, but he also worries that Joe might rat him out about the McClure killing. Joe wants out altogether, though, because he's gotta dance, gotta dance, gotta dance, and because he's in love with Olga. But Rico knows she's the weak spot and uses her as leverage against him. If he goes back to that dame, then it's suicide for both of ya. Joe rushes over to see his lady, demanding that they get out of town ASAP, but she and her nipples refuse. Yep, there are those nipples again. She wants them to go see Flaherty. She and Joe, that is, not the nipples. Well, the nipples would go too, I guess. But Joe knows that Rico will really have them killed if they volunteer to talk to the cops. Bad enough that they would ever talk to the cops, but volunteering to? Yeah, you're dead, man. And Joe was right, they should have just gotten out of there, because after she calls the sergeant, Rico shows up about a minute later. Rico pulls out that rod of his and advances on Joey M., but Robinson plays the torment about blowing away his buddy pretty effectively. He just can't do it, so Otero shoots at Joe instead, clipping him in the shoulder. Another shoulder shot. Rico jumped in and grabbed at Otero's arm to keep it from being worse. And it's always a glancing blow in movies when you don't want the characters to die instantly or even suffer a lot of pain. So instead of, "Ow, I'm really hurting here," it's, "My army arm hurties a little." Rico and Otero hustle out of the apartment with the police hot on their tail. A uniformed cop catches up to them and kills Otero with shots from behind, but somehow our little man gets away clean after he's able to turn and kill that cop. Sam and the rest of the gang panic and grab as many guns as they can, but Flaherty shows up and corners them. Sam doesn't even put up a fight. They cuff him, and Flaherty snarkily declares that Rico is next. Bandello hides out in a flophouse run by a surly old lady. She almost looks like a man dressed in drag, but you can't deny that she's got a lot of character in that weird face. A title card says that months pass, and Rico's organization has been gutted. The real gutted, not the kind where a famous person you never met dies in a fairly non-tragic way, and you tell the social media world how broken up about it you are. Somehow, nobody has recognized Little Caesar, or maybe they just don't want to turn him in, because even though he looks like crapola, he's managed to survive all this time in what I guess is a different flophouse from the one we saw run by that surly person. One of the, what were they called then? The Forgotten Men, they say in My Man Godfrey? Forgotten Men? Reads a story in the newspaper where Flaherty rips into Rico for being a coward who let Sam take the heat for him. Rico's flop mates agree that the little mobster they didn't know was sitting right there, or laying right there, was Yella, which enrages our man. His ego can't take being insulted, so he decides to blow his cover and call Flaherty directly. They trace the call, see? And Flaherty goads him for a bit, so that the tracer has time to figure out where the former gangster is hiding. And it works. The cops hustle over to the general location of the flophouse and find a drunk and disheveled Rico shambling down the street. They start shooting as he hides behind a big billboard that, ironically, promotes a show starring Joe and Olga. Things really worked out for him once Rico went into hiding, and he fixed his little arm pain. The Fuzz fire off their machine guns through the billboard, and finally, the killer has gotten himself into a pickle that he isn't going to get out of. But not before he gets to ask that immortal question, "Mother of mercy, is this the end of Rico?" Great performance here and throughout this movie by Robinson, but you have to be happy to see this lunatic bite the dust, even if Flaherty was a smug jerk in his own right. And yep, Rico, this is the end of you. The end of Rico. So, the cast. Edward G. Robinson was in only one AFI movie, but it's one of the best ones in the entire list. Double Indemnity, where he plays a good guy, actually. He's an insurance adjuster, and I'm not a fan of those guys right now for reasons I won't tell you, but still, he's a good guy. We not only reviewed that back in November 2013, but we've watched it again at least once since then, maybe twice. The Romanian-born Emanuel Goldenberg was also great as the bad guy in Key Largo, which I reviewed last year, and he was also a supporting character in one of the biggest hits of all time, The Ten Commandments, which Bev and I analyzed quite a few years ago. "Where's your Messiah now?" That's right, that's the line in that one, isn't it? The man was involved with over 100 projects, a lot of which were crime pictures, of course, but he was a lot more than just a meh guy. I know I rip on the AFI's top 50 stars list a lot, but I also reference it quite often, gotta admit I do, and they at least got Eddie on there. He was 24th of the 25 male actors. I believe Mitchum was 25th, so two of the better actors in the whole list are at the bottom of it. I was reading that Rico wasn't really based on Al Capone the way you might think. Chicago Gangster and all that stuff. Tony Camonte in Scarface the next year was a Capone-related character, yes, but supposedly not Rico Bandello. He was based on some other Chicago gangster named Cardinella. I love the story that I've heard about other actors playing killers as Robinson does here, in that he couldn't keep from flinching and blinking when shooting a gun. It's cute that even though he's supposed to be this cold-blooded murderer, this great actor couldn't pretend not to be rattled by the boom boom. That actually tracks, though, because I've read that Eddie was a sweetheart in real life. He was an art connoisseur and was very soft-spoken when he wasn't playing characters like this one, and the one in Key Largo. He also got a fantastic swan song to his movie career in Soylent Green. Here's a spoiler alert on that 50-plus-year-old movie, but his character dies peacefully while being shown beautiful images. Appropriate for the real-life art lover, too. And since the man himself died not too long after they shot the film, it was a lovely ending for the real guy. Of course, I think they're about to chop him up and turn him into food, but at least old Saul Roth, the character in that movie, and Emmanuel Goldenberg got to say goodbye in a nice way. Douglas Fairbanks Jr. is Joe. His dad married Mary Pickford and helped start United Artists, of course, but Jr. had a pretty decent movie career of his own. Plus, he was married to Joan Crawford for nearly 5 years. There must have been stories to tell after that experience. Doug went on to work with Kate Hepburn in Morning Glory a few years later. I believe she won an Oscar for that. Then with Cary Grant in Gunga Din, and then the latter stages of his career saw him doing a lot of TV movies and TV shows. This was one of Glenda Farrell's first films, and her nipples too. Olga here went on to work with Mervyn LeRoy in I Am a Fugitive from a Chain Gang and Johnny Eager. She had a pretty good career. She was still making things nearly 40 years later. Stanley Fields was new to making movies and only acted for another 10 years, although he has over 100 credits on the IMDb, and some of them are pretty impressive. He was in the Best Picture winner Cimarron the same year Little Caesar came out. Then he was in Island of Lost Souls the next year. I saw that again not long ago. It's pretty good. He'd be in another Best Picture winner in 1935, which was Mutiny on the Bounty. We've reviewed that, of course, because it was on AFI's Top 100 list. Snarky Sarge Thomas E. Jackson, had about 190 credits on his resume. 2 of those were The Woman in the Window and Scarlet Street, both of which starred Edward G. Robinson. He also had a small role in Yankee Doodle Dandy, which was on AFI's Top 100 list, so we covered it a long time ago. George Stone, who plays Otero, went on to be Toothpick Charlie in Some Like It Hot, and like Stanley Fields, he was in Cimarron the same year of 1931. He's also got a small role in Pickup on South Street, a great little crime flick that I reviewed last year. And of course, we've reviewed Some Like It Hot, too. Interestingly, George Stone is also the name Andy Garcia uses instead of the character's real Italian name of Giuseppe Petri in The Untouchables. I wonder if David Mamet or Brian De Palma were homaging this actor, although his real name wasn't George Stone either. It was Gershon Lichtenstein, spelled exactly like the country. And while Stone was pretty good in this movie, I wonder if they cast him at least partly because he was only 5'3", so even Robinson could be a little taller than the guy he spends a lot of time with on screen. The director was Mervyn LeRoy. He produced The Wizard of Oz 8 years later, but that's the only film of his that we've ever reviewed before today. His directing rap sheet boasts some really good stuff, though. I Am a Fugitive from a Chain Gang, so with Glenda Farrell, of course. 30 Seconds Over Tokyo, Mr. Roberts. That was a movie that John Ford technically directed. I think other people, maybe Joshua Logan as well, got credit on that, but it is at least a partial uncredited credit for LeRoy. And even The Bad Seed. You've got crime and war and comedy and horror and musicals just in those half dozen titles alone, including Wizard of Oz. The guy dipped his toe in nearly every genre as a director and as a producer. Francois Edward Farrago and Robert N. Lee wrote the script, which was based on W.R. Burnett's novel called Little Caesar. Farrago also had a credit on Frankenstein in 1931, although he was Francis Edwards, plural, Farrago on that picture, which is also how he was billed in a script for something called Prestige that same year. And when you look through his credits, sometimes he's Edwards, plural, and sometimes he's Edwards, singular. Pick a side, Francis, we're at war. As for Lee, the rest of his titles weren't that impressive, but he did get credit on Captain Kidd in 1945, the last thing he ever worked on, which was directed by his brother Roland. Roland Tomasi. The producers were 2 huge names, Hal Wallace and Daryl Zanuck. Wallace was a longtime Warner Brothers guy, while Zanuck became best known for running Fox. As for the technicals, the DVD I got from the library didn't look good at all. We were only a few years into the sound era in 1931, so I guess I have to cut it some slack. Although the sound was fine, it's just the print was horrid often. It wasn't every single scene, but sometimes just dreadful. But bad print or not, I enjoyed Little Caesar. It's fun to see Robinson in this and Cagney and the Public Enemy blossom into major movie stars in the very same year, and doing it in a way that wasn't typical. They played vicious mobsters, not romantic or heroic leads, or even memorable monsters the way Lugosi and Karloff did also in 1931 when they were Dracula and Frankenstein's monster. This is a cool and nasty little flick. I actually prefer Public Enemy and even the original Scarface, but it's hard to pick which of the lead performances I like best among them. Robinson, Cagney, and Paul Muni are all iconic, but of course I love doing the impression of Edward G. Robinson. What I can say is that I've seen this flick plenty of times. I feel like Bev and I watched it within the past year, and I've seen this more often than I've seen The Public Enemy or Scarface. So I'm thumbs up on this, just as I was when we reviewed those movies, although I do think this could have stood to be a little longer than about 80 minutes. If it was more like 90 minutes, they could have fleshed out the characters a little more, especially Joe, and we could have had Rico enjoying being a true mob boss a little longer than he did. He gets to be in charge of the north side of Chicago, and what, a scene or two later, that's all over with. But still, good movie. So that was how I saw Little Caesar. Oh, as for eating Little Caesar's pizza, well, I'm sure I have, but the taste wasn't good or bad enough to stick in my memory, so I can't comment on that further. Anyway, next Monday, I'll still be yapping alone, but maybe that'll be the last time. On a Monday, at least. Of course, Fridays I'm always alone anyway. As I record this just past the middle of April, Bev is recovering nicely from her heel surgery, so we'll see about mid-May, maybe later May. Anyway, I'll be reviewing Gene Kelly and Frank Sinatra in On the Town on the 13th. Getting in touch with us is a snap, see? Try email. We're haveyouverirseenpodcast@gmail.com. We don't spend much time on Twix, but we use it to promote this podcast, and occasionally I'll post there to express some explosive thoughts about stupid people and stupid things. Anyway, my handle is @MovieFiend51, and Bev's is @BevEllisEllis. She uses that on Threads, too. We'd love it if you would rate our show and write a review. You can do that on your podcast app, but also on YouTube. Follow us, like us, subscribe. Our address on the tube is @HYESEllis, or just go on YouTube and search for Have You Ever Seen. And one more time, I suggest you Java lovers see what you think of our sponsor, Sparkplug Coffee. They'll give you a 20% discount the next time you order from them if you use our HYES promo code. So it's sparkplug.coffee/HYES. So, fairly short episode today on a Monday, but these solo shows are usually shorter than the ones I do with Bev. And that'll do it for today. Thanks for listening. Join me 7 days from now when the talk will be about On the Town. On the town, on the town, on the town. Meantime, I'm going to hide behind a big billboard and wonder if this is the end of this podcast. Hey, what do you know? It is. And cut.